Hi, I'm Amy Snell, also known as the Devious Knitter, and I'm going to show you how we graft together two ends of fabric that are knit and facing together from opposite directions. This is based on the duplicate stitch. When we duplicate stitch, we want to replicate one stitch in our knitting. We do that by coming out from below the center of the stitch below, and then we follow the yarn up and under the two legs of the stitch above, and then back down into the same hole we came out of. We would move over to the next stitch, coming out of the center of the stitch below the stitch we're trying to duplicate, and again going under the two legs of the stitch above and back in the same hole where we came out. When we graft stitches together, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to be grafting these two sets of stitches together by duplicate stitching a row of stitches between them. I find it easiest to do this by taking one stitch at a time off the needle. So I'm just going to slide this stitch off and the stitch next to it. I'm going to take off the stitch at the bottom as well. I'm going to start by coming up in the center of this stitch, because this is my bottom stitch that's going to be below the stitch I'm creating. Then I'm going across the legs of these two stitches above. And when we join fabric that's been knit from two different sides, it is a half stitch off, as these are. And I go back down into the middle of the stitch below. And I'll come back up in the center of the next stitch on the needle. Looking back at the stitches above, I can see where I'm going to go through this leg of the first stitch and this leg of the second. Again, when I pull them down together, I can see how those two stitches are forming two legs of a knit stitch right there. So I'm going under this. And again, back down into the hole where my yarn came out and up through the center of the next stitch. If you're familiar with Kitchener stitch, this is going to look very familiar to you. It's really the same process. We're just looking at it flat with the yarn coming from two directions rather than on two needles to the front and back of each other. After a few stitches, we can see that we've created an uninterrupted piece of knitting that flows straight across.